Hi, I'm Josh from Allen Centennial Garden. You saw me last week when I harvested seeds. Today we are sowing seeds in our meadow. Sowing seeds in a meadow is a lot easier than planting plants. Personally, I think I would choose sowing seeds in a space more than planting plants for several reasons. One reason being, seeds, when they make contact with the soil, will establish themselves over the first year and really get to know the space, thus meaning that that space was adequate for them. By sowing from seed, you're also carrying more area, square footage, with less cost. So in our space, we're using, this is a 1,000 square foot space, we're using a seed packet for 1,000 square feet. We're getting a lot more bang for our buck by doing it that way. In order to get your meadow started, you have to start with a very important step. So in March, we actually laid down this black plastic, which we actually purchased from Amazon. So what this plastic is doing, it is smothering the site. We had a display planted here for about 3 years. Instead of digging out all the plants one by one, we chose to just smother all the plants that we didn't want. And we cut a hole through the plastic, like for this dogwood right here, plants that we wanted to keep. So right now what this plastic is doing, it is smothering the site, which means it is heating up the soil. It's allowing weed seeds and annual seeds to germinate, thus depriving them of sunlight and killing them. And the existing perennials that are in here, it is also killing off the existing perennials, so we can start with a clean slate for the new meadow seeds. If you're looking to find alternatives to black plastic, I know cardboard, thick cardboard will work, as well as old carpeting. As mentioned earlier, we laid down this plastic in March, and by doing that, we're allowing these weed seeds to germinate over the course of the entire year. So if you're looking to smother a site, it's really best that you smother it as early as you can. Like I said, we did it in March. If you go any later than that, you're really not going to have the chance to get all of the seeds that are going to germinate. And if you don't do it the right way, you're going to have weeds popping up in your meadow over time, especially if you have perennial weeds like Canadian thistle. There are other benefits to using the smothering method. We have jumping worms in this site, so we're actually experimenting this year to see if the heat from the plastic will heat up the soil, thus killing jumping worms. And another benefit is we're not using any chemicals. So before you sow your meadow, you have to choose what type of seed is the best choice for your meadow or your space. So there are several ways to do this. The obvious one is looking at your soil. So what I'm gonna do here is just kind of dig up some of the soil, and this looks like a mixture of loamy soil right here. So I'll tell you the differences. This is loamy because it still kind of crumbles in my hand. Sandy will most likely never form a ball of any type or hold together. And then if you have clay soil, the clay soil will hold its form in your hand completely. And it's also kind of streaky. When you kind of wipe it around your hand, you'll see streaks. The other thing to look for on your site is obviously your lighting. So you can see that this site is full sun, all day full sun. And then also looking at the soil moisture content. And it kind of goes with the type of soil that we have, which I said was loamy, which means it's partly, it's always has moisture in it, but it's also well drained, but not super well drained and dry like sand would be, and not super moist like clay would be. So when is the best time to sow your seed? You'll find out later in this video the pros and cons of sowing each time of the year, which is specifically fall or spring. Right now we are sowing seeds in the fall, which is ideal for these conditions. I also want to go over, when you are sowing your seed, you want to make sure that you choose a day that is dry. There's no rain, very little to no wind, and that your site, the soil is fairly dry. Now we had this soil covered up for the majority of the year. We actually had rain a couple of days ago, but with the plastic being over the site, the soil is still fairly dry, which is best bet for sowing your seeds. This is our first time uncovering the site. Take a look at how well smothering works. After you remove all material used to smother your site, you will need to clean and rake any plant debris left behind. We do this because we want to make sure that the seeds make direct contact with the soil for better chance of germination. We smothered the site with some existing perennials and now there is nothing left, but a clear site, ready for seeds. So when is the best time to sow seed? There are both pros and cons depending on what season you're in. For fall, we're going to talk about the benefits of sowing in fall. So you won't need to water seeds throughout the year or worry about them drying out in the fall. So if you're sowing them in the late fall, it's cool, things are starting to go dormant, you won't have to worry about watering them. Another thing that's important is when you sow seeds over the winter or in the fall, they will break dormancy over the winter with the temperatures, which will allow a lot of wildflower seeds to germinate in the spring, which goes into the next point, how it allows more flowers to germinate better than a fall sowing or with a fall sowing. And then several other things, two other things, soil is easier to work right now in the fall. And fall sowing is great for dry clay and sandy soils. So there are a couple of cons to fall sowing. I only have a few of them. So native grasses need a period of warmth to germinate. So if you were to sow your seeds in the fall, you're not going to have the chance over the winter for them to germinate. They're going to start germinating over the spring period. And another thing that's really important to look at is if you sow in the fall and it's an erosion-prone site, it's exposed to winter. So if there's a lot of, let's say we get rain in the winter, or sleet, or a bunch of snow, there's a chance that those seeds will erode away or wash away. So there are some pros to sowing in the spring. A couple of them are you will have a better chance with grasses, especially a lot of warm season grasses. They have a better chance and they actually prefer to germinate in warmer weather. The next thing is if you sow in spring, there's more chance of rain than in the fall. So you won't have to keep watering your seeds in the spring because generally we get a lot of rain. So there are a couple cons in the spring that you want to look out for. So there's a limited opportunity for weed control if you didn't smother before. So if you're looking to sow seeds in the spring and you haven't smothered a site at all, that's definitely probably the worst idea you have because you're going to have a lot of weed competition throughout the year. And a lot of your native seeds will be outcompeted by those weed seeds. Another thing are clay soils are too wet in the spring and hard to work with. And the drought from a clay soil, once it hits summer, you have to keep watering your seeds in the spring all the time. After the rains let's say the rains have stopped in the late spring, and once it hits summer and you sow in late spring, you're gonna worry about your seeds drying out and you're gonna have to water them more often. Before you sow your seed, you need to mix it with a carrier. Some carrier options are sand, wood shavings, perlite. Right here we have sand. When mixing sand with seeds, The rule of thumb is per 1,000 square feet of seeds is 2 bushels or 2.5 cubic feet of carrier. Since I'm sowing half of this section, we actually have another section right here that needs to be sowed. I'm just doing this section today. I'm going to be using 1 bushel, and I'm going to be using half of the seeds that were received from Prairie Nursery. If you want to come in closer, this is the mix that we chose for our site. We received this seed mix, low growing, medium soil seed mix from Prairie Nursery. Some of the seeds that are in this bag are prairie drop seed, little blue stem, lanceolate coreopsis, blazing star, penstemon, among many others. We're going to start mixing the seed in with the carrier in this wagon first, so we just have a lot of room to scoop things up and move things around. So let me show you how to do all this. So I mentioned before, I'm just using 1 bushel because I'm doing half of the size of the area. This is sand. It's actually already fairly moist. You don't want to use bone dry sand because you need the seed to cling to some type of carrier. The rain a few days ago actually made the sand somewhat moist, but not super wet where it's clumping together. So this is the perfect texture that you want for your sand and moisture. So I'm going to start adding in. Prairie Nursery actually kind of puts seeds into different bags and sections. So right here, this is, these are grasses. So this is going to be side oats grama and little blue stem. I'm going to use half of this bag. And I'm just going to mix it with our carrier. All right. A bit more. I feel like I'm cooking up something right now. I'm really into cooking, so this is like another way of cooking, right? All right, here's the wildflower mix. We're going to use half of this. So they usually separate the flowers, the wildflowers with the grasses. I'm going to use half of this. Wildflowers are in there. The last one we are adding is prairie drop seed. We actually harvested the seed in our last video, Sprablus heterolepis. If I actually happen to pour a little too much, I can always grab some that I harvested last week. So we have some seeds remaining for the other half of our section. The only thing we have to do now is mix everything by hand. So this is the beauty of having a wheelbarrow or just a large mixing bowl, as I could say. Just making sure that these seeds are homogeneously mixed through the mixture. And this is pretty much ready to go. Let's start sowing seed. So what are the benefits of using a carrier with your seed? Carrier adds weight or bulk to your seed mix. If you were not using carrier, your seeds would basically just drift off into space and land wherever. By using a moist carrier, seeds will make contact with the ground, which increases your chances of germination. So what I'm going to do next is divide the seed mixture into 2. The reason why I'm dividing it into 2 is because when we apply these seeds and sow these seeds, we need to go from a north-south direction first. Then we go back over with the second bushel and do an east-west direction. That way we are covering all of the soil, making sure that we're not missing any edges or crevices or corners. Just making sure it's equally dispersed throughout the space. So right now we are dividing this mixture in half because we are going to go north-south, east-west. So I'm putting half of this mixture into a bushel. As mentioned before, I will start sowing seed with the first half by walking in a north and south direction and using the other half in an east and west direction. I am doing this to make sure I have equal distribution of seed to cover the site completely and avoid myself running out of seed and overseeding. Here you have seen I have switched directions for the remaining seeds. Now that the seeds are sown and on the ground, we need to get them in the ground. There are different ways of doing this. The easiest way for us at the garden is stopping it in place, but other ways you can do it is by using a weighted attachment to your lawnmower, a small vehicle like a bobcat, if you had something like that on hand. But like I said, in a small garden setting like this, the best way to do it and practice a lot of meditation is doing it by foot. Rolling or stepping our seed into place is required for prairie seed germination. So take some time to meditate, get acclimated with your space, and think about what your garden will look like in the next few years. Or you can break that meditation and have some fun with it. After we sowed our seed and just stomped it into place, now we need to cover the seed. Right now at the moment we don't have any straw or hay to use, but in the next few days we'll cover the space with straw or hay. And I want to make a really important note. It's really important that you use stale straw or hay. If you do not use stale straw or hay, you'll risk getting hay or straw that has weed seeds in them, and basically everything that you've done for the entire season has gone to waste and is no longer usable. And a lot of your prairie plants or your meadow plants are going to be competing with a lot more weeds than they should be. So it's just really important to use stale straw or hay. You can find that at a farm and garden center, farm and fleet, something like that. They usually have it. By using stale straw, you do several things. First thing, it's going to keep the moisture in with the seeds. And second thing, it's not going to blow away. If the seeds are embedded in the soil enough, they won't blow away, but just having that layer of straw on top will keep them moist, keep them from drying out, and just keep them protected and insulated over the winter. After your newly planted seeds sit over winter, and once they start germinating in the spring, it's really important to do ongoing site maintenance. So I'm going to use this prairie that we installed a few years ago as an example. So right now we have a lot of native prairie plants popping up in this space, and we want a lot of these plants, but there are a lot of plants in here that we do not want. Instead of pulling them out, we don't want to pull them out because we don't want to disturb the newly germinated seeds. Because right now at this moment, those germinated seeds are establishing themselves in your site. So in order to do on-site maintenance, ongoing maintenance, we want to keep these seedlings, these weed seedlings, from reseeding. And a rule of thumb, within the first year, when you see things germinating and growing, the plants that are growing fairly quickly are generally a weed seed. The ones that are generally growing a lot slower are your native prairie or meadow seeds that you are growing. So as I was getting into, you want to make sure that these all seedlings, including the ones that you sow, don't get any taller than a foot. So here's a really good example. We have some Verbena bonariensis that's seeded in itself. I don't want it, and I want to keep it from seeding. So what I'm going to do is make sure that I cut this back. Now, it would take a lot of time to do this all by hand. Generally, we recommend that you use a push mower and you cut it. When it gets to a foot, you cut it every about 3 or 4 times a year, the season, before everything goes to seed. And it's okay if you cut back some of your prairie plants. They, as I said, are investing their roots in the ground right now, so you're not going to kill them by cutting them back, but you will keep your weeds at bay by inhibiting them from reseeding, and their root systems are very shallow. So just by doing this method, this ongoing maintenance, you will keep the health of your meadow or prairie going and flourishing, allowing your plants, your prairie plants, to keep growing, to establish themselves, and pushing out other weeds or annual weeds that you do not want. Plants that are slow to grow bear the best fruit. If you follow these steps in the right order and with every detail, you will reap the benefits. Remember, when sowing a meadow, make sure that you take every step possible in order to make it successful. Thank you for joining me today on Sowing a Meadow. Join us in our next episode, leaf mulch making, on October 15th. Stay well.